Welcome to today's information session on how to apply for a post-graduation work permit or a PGWP. My name is Alexandra, and I work as an international student advisor with the International Office, and I'm also a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. So thank you all for coming, and without wasting too much time, let's just get into the content. So what I'd like to cover today is, of course, what is a post-grad work permit? Who's eligible, what considerations you should keep in mind to maintain your eligibility, who is not eligible, a timeline that you should keep in mind in terms of when and how to apply, what documents are required. I'll talk a little bit about biometrics. I'll talk about where you can apply. I'll briefly mention flagpoling, and we'll go over the travel restrictions, which are ever changing. We'll talk about the validity or duration of a post-grad work permit. We'll talk about work authorization after you apply for a post-grad work permit, and then a little bit about the social insurance number and work permit for spouses or common law partners as well. I will also, it's not on here, but we're also going to go over how to apply for the post-grad work permit, like step by step. So I'm going to take a break from the PowerPoint and actually go onto the IRCC website and actually generate the application together, and then go over all of the application forms. And then I'm of course going to take your questions as well. I'll save those for the end, but if you want, you're free to populate them into the chat as you think of them. But again, I will be addressing them at the end. So I already introduced myself, but I also have two other colleagues who are also international student advisors, Ali Belbashir and Farha Hafsawi. They are also regulated Canadian immigration consultants. So we are 3 staff members at the International Office who are authorized and allowed to give you immigration advice and support you with your immigration questions. So I just wanted to mention that. This, again, presentation is really going to be a tutorial on how to apply for a post-grad work permit. I will be saying IRCC instead of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada every time, because that is a mouthful. So if I say IRCC, just know that's who I'm talking about. So what is a post-grad work permit? So a post-grad work permit is an open work permit. And what that means is that it allows you to work for any employer in any province or territory in Canada. There are no restrictions on the work permit whatsoever, besides the expiry date, I guess, if you look at it that way. So open work permit. And I wanted to mention that applicants can only receive 1 post-graduation work permit in their lifetime. So this is really important to keep in mind if you are someone who is maybe thinking of pursuing further studies. So maybe you just finished your undergrad, thinking about doing a master's, something like that. You won't be able to apply for a post-grad work permit now and then also apply again after you finish a master's. It's really a one-time thing. So when you're thinking about it, we just really like to encourage you to really make sure that when you apply for your post-grad work permit, you're really able to take full advantage of it, because you won't be able to apply for it again or extend it. Now, that being said, there is one exception to being able to extend a post-grad work permit, and that is related to the expiry of your passport. So if your current passport will expire before the full validity that you're eligible for the post-grad work permit, then and only then are you able to actually extend your post-grad work permit. So if you're in a situation where your passport is expiring soon, just know that you will be able to extend your post-grad work permit. We would encourage you to try to do everything possible to renew your passport before applying for the post-grad work permit to avoid having to pay the processing and application fees twice, but not always possible. Some countries are very strict about how early you can renew a passport. So just wanted to mention it and keep that in mind. Okay. Let's talk now about the eligibility requirements for a post-grad work permit. So in order to be eligible, you need to have completed a program of study from an eligible institution. So not all institutions in Canada are eligible. Ottawa is, just so you know. Your program has to be at least 8 months long. That is the minimum. And most importantly, your program has to lead to either a degree, a diploma, or a certificate. So you can't just take random courses for 8 months and then apply for a postgrad work permit. They really need to lead towards a credential. You also have to have maintained full-time status throughout your entire program. Now, there are some exceptions. For example, your final academic term. Let's say you have always been a full-time student for your entire program, and then in your final term, you only require a part-time course load to finish the requirements of your program. That's okay, there is an exception for that. There's also an exception for courses taken during a scheduled break. So as an example, undergrad students are normally only expected to enroll in the fall and winter terms. They're not expected to enroll in the summer term, but some students decide to take 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 courses even in the summer. That also will not impact your postgrad work permit eligibility. Those are really considered extra courses. So if you're part-time during a break, that's no problem. There's also an exception for students who need to take an authorized leave from studies. So let's say, you get into an accident and you have to take a medical leave of absence for 1 term. That is also acceptable as long as you provide proof that the leave was authorized by the university and proof that you were, respecting the conditions of your study permit during that leave by not working, and it wasn't more than 150 days, then that is also an exception for the postgrad work permit. There are also a couple exceptions related to COVID-19 that I'll go over in the next slide. So those are the eligibility criteria for the postgrad work permit. And then this is also important. When you apply for the postgrad work permit, you need to have a valid status if you're applying from inside Canada, or you need to be applying outside Canada if you no longer have a valid status. So I briefly mentioned the authorized leave. So that is an exception for the postgrad work permit. So you can still be considered to be actively pursuing your studies if you respect the conditions of your study permit during a leave. So what does that mean? So in general, it means that any leave taken from a program in Canada should not exceed 150 days from the date that the leave started. And it has to be authorized by the DLI, which is Designated Learning Institution. So 150 days is basically almost like a term and a half, pretty much. So it's like a little bit less, it's like about 5 months, I would say. So in general, that is the maximum duration that a leave is supposed to be. If the leave has to be more than 150 days. So if you're not able to resume your studies within the 150 days, you're supposed to do either of the following. You're supposed to either apply to change your status if you want to remain in Canada during the leave without being enrolled. So that would be probably changing to visitor status or perhaps worker status if you're eligible for a work permit. Or the other option would be to leave Canada and only return when you're able to resume your full-time studies. So this is what you would have to do if your leave from studies was going to be more than 150 days. So if you don't change your status or leave Canada, then you would be considered non-compliant with your study permit conditions. So you'd be considered, basically one of the conditions of your study permit is to actively pursue studies. So if you're going more than 150 days, not studying, then you're considered not actively pursuing your studies, which puts you at risk. And I think I already mentioned that an example of a medical leave, an example of an authorized leave could be for medical reasons, could be for pregnancy, it could be for a whole bunch of reasons. If you are in a situation where you need to take a leave from your studies, we would recommend that you reach out to us to have a one-on-one advising appointment with an advisor, just to make sure that you have all the info that you need to take into consideration in that kind of situation. So I also talked about the exception for part-time studies. So as I mentioned, if you were full-time during each session of your program, but then for the very final term of your program, you only require a part-time course load to finish your program, that's okay. you're still eligible for the postgrad work permit. And on top of that, you're still eligible to work part-time during the term that you're studying part-time, which is nice because, as you know, normally you do need to be a full-time student to be able to work using your study permit. There is an exception for the final term, once again, as long as you are full-time kind of the entire time leading up to that final term. I also briefly mentioned the COVID-19 related exemptions for the postgrad work permit eligibility. So during the winter and spring 2020 terms, kind of, you know, peak COVID times, I guess, there was an exception for students who were forced because of the pandemic to either become part-time or take a leave from their studies. So that exception was, special for COVID-19. And it only applies to the winter and spring summer 2020 terms. So if you are in a situation where this happened to you, please make sure that you're including a letter of explanation in your application, and make sure you mention COVID-19 a lot so that it's very clear that that is the reason that you were either forced to become part-time or take a leave from your studies at that time. So that is for COVID-19. Let's talk a little bit about other who might not be eligible for a postgrad work permit. So one example is, of course, if you've already received a postgrad work permit, because as I mentioned, unfortunately, it's a one-time thing. Another example of someone who might not be eligible is if they participated in the Government of Canada Awards program, which is funded by Global Affairs Canada. So it's a very particular scholarship program, and one of the requirements of the program is to actually return, to the country of citizenship after the studies are completed. So in that case, you wouldn't be eligible to apply for a work permit to stay in Canada after your studies because it's stipulated in the scholarship agreement. So that's just another example. And then we're giving you the link here to the IRCC website where you can see other examples of people who might not be eligible for a postgrad work permit. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick sip of water here. Okay, let's talk now about the application timelines. So you have 180 days, which is 6 months, to apply for the postgrad work permit. When does that 180 days kind of clock start? Well, it starts basically when your final grades and academic standing are considered official. So that's when so you have 180 days, you need to have your final grades. You also need to have valid temporary status. So your study permit needs to be valid if you're going to be applying from inside Canada, or your study permit has to have been valid at some point during the 180 days. And you either applied to change your status to visitor before your permit became invalid, you applied to restore you're planning to apply to restore your temporary resident status at the same time that you apply for your postgrad work permit. I do not recommend this option, but I'm mentioning it because it is technically possible. Or you've left Canada and you're going to be applying from outside Canada and only returning once your application is approved. So those are the general kind of timelines. So you might be wondering, okay, when does my study permit become invalid? Which is a great question. So a study permit can become invalid two ways. So it can either become invalid on the expiry date indicated on that permit, or it can become invalid 90 days after you receive a communication from the school that you have completed the requirements for your program of study. Whichever comes first. And this is super important because you might be in a situation where your studies are taking less time than you thought and your permit might be valid. The expiry date might not be for like a year or two from now, but your study permit will still become invalid 90 days after you've received a written confirmation that you've completed your program. So just keep in mind that once you have an official confirmation that you've completed your program, like the clock starts ticking and you should take action within those 90 days. So as I mentioned, you do have 180 to apply for the postgrad work permit, but it is better to apply in the first 90 while your study permit is still valid, especially if you want to apply from inside Canada. So what kind of written confirmation counts to kind of start that 90-day kind of clock? So a written confirmation could be an email from your faculty. It could be your actual physical diploma. It could be an official transcript, final transcript, or it could be an official letter confirming that you've completed your studies. So those are all examples of what the written confirmation could look like and when that could kind of start your countdown for when your study permit could become invalid. Now, to get an idea of when any of these kind of written confirmations will become available, we need to look at the important dates and important academic dates and deadlines webpage. So let's do that now. If my computer, yes, cooperates. Okay, so I'm sure you are all familiar with this website. What we're going to look at today is for the winter 2022 term, we're going to look at grades and exams. So we can see here that your official final grades, the latest they'll be posted is May 17th. Of course, they might be available sooner, but that's the latest, and it will depend on the speed at which your professors enter grades and the faculty does their checks and all that. And then we have another date here when your official academic standing is posted, and that's May 27th. So normally, the faculty will only be able to confirm that you've met the requirements of your program after everything is considered official. So you would have to wait until your grades are considered official and or your academic standing is considered official before being able to get that official document. So I just wanted to mention that because it sometimes causes confusions. Students are like, well, when can I apply? This is basically to give you an idea. So only as of mid to late May will you actually be able to apply for the postgrad work permit. So what I would encourage you to do is keep an eye on your grades, see when they become available, and request your support letter as soon as possible. And I'm going to go over in the next slide who to request it from, depending on if you're an undergrad student or a grad student. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint. So I just wanted to go over the timeline in a little bit a more visual way. When you're a full-time student, or let's say you're a part-time student, but it's your final term and you've always been full-time except for this term, you're eligible to work part-time, right? 20 hours off campus, no limit on campus. That work authorization continues even after you finish your exams. That part-time work authorization continues until the day that you receive this written notification that you've successfully completed your program. As soon as you receive that written notification, you have to stop working. You lose your work authorization because you've basically just been confirmed you're no longer a student. So study permit work authorization is over. So you then have to apply, you submit the postgrad work permit application. And then as long as you're submitting between day 0 so the day you receive your written confirmation, and day 90, when your study permit will become invalid, if you submit within those dates, you're able to start working full-time as soon as your application is received by IRCC. So you don't need to wait for the work permit to be processed. As long as your study permit was valid when you applied for the postgrad work permit and you were eligible to work off campus before as a student, you're able to start working full-time until a decision is made on your postgrad work permit application. So that's really nice. So this is what it looks like if you apply within the 90-day kind of validity. Now let's look at what happens if you apply outside. So same thing, you're eligible to work part-time while you're still considered a student. And then you get your written confirmation. So you have to stop working immediately. And then 90 days goes by, you haven't applied for your postgrad work permit yet. Let's say it's day 110, and now you apply for the postgrad work permit here. Unfortunately, you cannot work until your postgrad work permit has been approved in that case, because you will have applied after the 90 days. So your study permit would no longer be considered valid. So you would not be eligible to work while you wait for a decision on your postgrad work permit. So this is why we really encourage you to apply as soon as possible when you have your completion documents available. And what often students do, let me just go back to this slide really quickly. What often students will do is they watch their grades, you know, not obsessively, but they check it regularly to see when they're available. And as soon as they're all available, they email their faculty right away to do the file evaluation, to kind of get your request for a support letter in the queue, because you know there's going to be a lot of students requesting this letter. So ask for it as soon as possible so that you can get it as soon as possible, so that then you can apply as soon as possible. Okay, so let's talk now about this support letter. And what are the required academic documents for a postgrad work permit application? So there are only two. So the first one is this official letter that confirms you've completed your program. And depending on what time of year you're requesting this letter, the answer is a little bit different about where you get it from. So if you're requesting it before your degree has been conferred, which will be the case for most of you, like the vast majority of you, if you're an undergrad student, you can request this letter from your faculty. They might have either you send your request by email, or depending on your faculty, there might be like a special portal that you can use to submit your letter of attestation request. So that's for undergrad. If you're a grad student, you need to request this letter from InfoService. So InfoService is actually the one who's going to be issuing this letter of completion for grad students. But in order for InfoService to issue it, the faculty does have to have like evaluated your file and checked off that you've met the requirements. So even though you're going to be requesting the letter from InfoService, I would still encourage you to reach out to your faculty once all of your final grades are available to ask for the file evaluation to be done, so that then you can get your letter from InfoService. So that is my recommendation for that. If you happen to be requesting this letter after your degree has been conferred, then what you would do is you would need to ask for an official enrollment verification letter. And that would be from InfoService, whether you're undergrad or grad. And then you'd have to make sure to include my earned degrees, so that the mention of degree awarded is on that enrollment verification. So it's just a little bit different if you're requesting it after your degree has been conferred. So that's for the official letter. The second required academic document is your transcript, final transcript. So you could either request the official one from InfoService, or you can use a copy of your unofficial transcript that's available in your UOzone account. For the transcript specifically, IRCC very clearly indicates on their website that it does not need to be official. So you are definitely free to use the unofficial one from UOzone, but just make sure that all of your grades are on there. Like, it does have to be the final transcript. As for the letter, that one absolutely has to be official, no exceptions. So those are the required academic documents. Now, depending on your situation, we might be recommending other supporting documents, but those are kind of case by case. So I would say if you meet the eligibility criteria for the postgrad work permit, like without a doubt, you've always been full-time, no exceptions, then this should be all you need. However, if you don't meet the eligibility requirements, or you're a little bit unsure, then I would recommend book an advising appointment, and we can kind of go over, you know, our recommendations about what other supporting documents you might want to include in that case. Okay, so those are the required academic documents. I wanted to quickly mention biometrics. So as of today, and obviously this is subject to change always, as of today, if you're applying from inside Canada, for the postgrad work permit, you are still exempt from giving biometrics. Also, if you've already given biometrics in the past, those remain valid for 10 years. So this might not even be an issue for you. But if you are someone who hasn't given biometrics, or they're expired, just know that you shouldn't need to give them in the context of this application because that exemption is still in place. However, the online system will probably charge you the fee for it anyway, which is $85. And you will need to pay it to be able to submit your application. But because of the exemption, our understanding is that when IRCC finalizes your postgrad work permit application, they should be refunding you that $85 fee. If they don't, please follow up with them via the web form, and we've linked it here. As long as this exemption is still in place, you should be eligible to, you should be exempt, and then you should not have to pay the biometrics fee, or if you do, it should be refunded to you. So that is for biometrics. Well, actually, one last thing I wanted to highlight is that this is only for inside Canada. If you're outside Canada applying for your postgrad work permit and you need to give biometrics, you have to give biometrics. There's no exemption for outside Canada. Okay. I'd like to talk now about where to apply. Obviously, the most secure and the option that we recommend across the board is applying online. And then I'm going to go over a few more slides, and then I will show you how to apply online. But there is technically another option, which we refer to as flagpoling, which is basically traveling to the border and the nearest border, land border, for the purposes of submitting an immigration application. Now, this option, going to the border, is possible, technically possible. However, really, really not recommended for a lot of reasons, but mainly very, very inconsistent experiences from students who have gone this route. So we really advise against it. We recommend that you apply online. Yes, the processing times can be long, but as long as you're applying with a valid study permit, you're able to start working anyway while you wait. And new in the past few years is that IRCC gives, so they used to just give you a confirmation that they've received your application, which is standard. But now they also give a second letter confirming your authorization to work while you wait for a decision. So that has been really helpful for students in kind of navigating those conversations with potential employers. So we really find it to be much less of an issue now because, you know, before that letter, not every employer understood a student's right to work. And so they would demand a copy of the work permit. And that's when students felt like they had no choice but to go to the border to get it right away. With this letter, we've found that it's way less of an issue. So would really recommend just applying online. I wanted to quickly talk about the travel restrictions. Sorry, just one moment. Okay, so for the travel restrictions, thankfully we're seeing these continue to be eased, which is good sign, good news. So it should be much less complicated to travel now. And I'm knocking on wood that things continue on this trajectory. So basically, if you meet the fully vaccinated traveler exemption and you have valid travel documents, then you should be totally fine. You're no longer required to demonstrate that your travel to Canada is essential, unlike the past 2 years. So you do, of course, need to have proof of vaccination available. And as of April 1st, you are no longer required to do, you will no longer be required to do a pre-departure COVID test, but you may still need to do one upon arrival if you're selected. So that arrival test is still being requested in some cases, but the pre-departure one as of April 1st will no longer be required. Now, of course, this is as of today. Things change all the time, so please triple check the travel restrictions before you travel, always. And we're giving you the link here. I wanted to quickly talk about the validity that a postgrad work permit can have. So it is issued based on the length of your program of study. So as I mentioned, the program does need to be a minimum of 8 months. So that is the minimum validity that a postgrad work permit can have. And it can have a maximum duration of 3 years. And of course, it cannot go beyond the applicant's passport date. So you can never get a permit that goes beyond the validity of your passport. So as I mentioned earlier, if your passport expires before the full validity that you're eligible for, you will get a shorter work permit, but you will also be able to extend it in that case. So how it works is depending on your program of study. So if your program of study is less than 2 years in duration, then the length or validity of your postgrad work permit will be, it'll coincide with the length of your program. And then if your program is 2 years or more, you are eligible for a 3-year work permit. That is the maximum validity. So even if you study for 6 years, say you do a PhD, you're still getting a 3-year work permit. So it's 2 years or more is a 3-year work permit. Less than 2 years, it should have the same duration as your program. Now, how IRCC will determine the length of your program, he'll be assessing that, he or she will be assessing that based on the academic documents that you're providing in the postgrad work permit application. So that means they're going to be basing that on your completion letter and on your transcript. So the completion letter, and this is more so at the grad level, the wording that's going to be used to describe the duration of your program is going to be the exact same wording that's used in the official description of your program. So you can see here, we're giving you a link. You can visit the link to then find your program, and you can see what the official duration of your program is considered to be. And that will be exactly what is put on your official completion letter that InfoService will issue. So that's for graduate students. At the undergraduate level, because undergraduate degrees are a minimum 3 years, this isn't really an issue as much because you're all eligible for 3-year work permits basically. So the letter that the faculty will just give the number of units that your program is, depending on which option you chose. And then your transcript is going to show the actual time you spent studying. So your official letter might say, 2-year program, and then they'll see your transcript. And if that reflects a 2 years of studies, then you should get a 3-year work permit in that case. So that is for the postgrad work permit validity. Now there are a couple of things that could impact the validity or duration of a postgrad work permit that you could receive. So one example is students who may accelerate their studies. So if a student basically completes their program in less time than the official duration or the normal duration of a program, then the student should be eligible for a work permit that's the validity is the same as the normal length of the program. So just because you accelerated your program doesn't mean that you should get a shorter work permit. You should still be eligible based on the official length of the program. So that's one thing. And I also wanted to quickly talk about distance learning, and this is before COVID-19. I will talk about current COVID-19 distance learning policy after, but before COVID, if more than 50% of your total courses were virtual, then you were no longer eligible for the work permit, unfortunately. So it had to be less than 50% of your total number of courses that could be online to maintain the eligibility for the postgrad work permit. This was obviously in a pre-pandemic world. In a pandemic world, distance learning is, the only thing that was available for several years. So, and this is in effect until August 31st, 2022. So if you're inside Canada, you're still eligible for the postgrad work permit, even if all of your classes were shifted to online. There's no issue. And then regardless of the number of courses that ended up being, and then if you're outside Canada, you can complete up to 100% of your studies online from outside Canada, and any time spent studying from between like spring 2020 and August 31st, 2022, all of that can count towards the length of a future of your work permit. So basically no impact. COVID will not negatively impact your postgrad work permit in terms of distance learning. So I just wanted to highlight that. And this is in effect until August 31st, 2022. So we're kind of expecting things to kind of go back to the normal side of things, which would mean back to in-person in September, but to be determined. Let's see how it goes. I wanted to touch on a few more things that can impact the validity of a postgrad work permit. So if you maybe transfer between educational institutions and maybe one of those institutions was not eligible for the postgrad work permit, then only the time spent studying at the actual eligible DLI or designated learning institution would count in that case. And then let's say you have a program with an overseas component. So for example, let's say you have an international exchange to do as part of your program. That's okay as long as you still are earning a Canadian educational credential, so a degree, diploma, or a certificate from a Canadian institution. But it's possible that the time you spent studying overseas, that time might get deducted from your work permit. That is the normal policy. Now, depending on the length of your program, this might not be an impact at all. So if you're an undergrad student studying for 4, maybe even 5 years, if you did a 4-month exchange or even an 8-month exchange, you still have way more time spent studying in Canada, and you should still get your full validity of work permit. But if you're in a short-term master's program, then losing 4 months or something that could have an impact. So I just wanted to mention it just to keep it in mind. Okay, this is the last slide that I will talk about before we take a break from the PowerPoint and we go to the actual walkthrough of how to generate an application. I just wanted to quickly mention about who's eligible to start working as soon as they apply for the postgrad work permit. So it is like a very separate and specific authorization. So it's not the same as your study permit work authorization. It's really an authorization to work without a work permit. And in order to be eligible, you have to obviously have a valid study permit when you submitted your postgrad work permit application. You have to have completed your program, and you had to have been eligible to work off campus while you were studying. So that means the remark that has to be on your study permit, the remark that confirms that you were eligible to work off campus. And you didn't work more hours than you were allowed to. This is also super important. So you have to have respected the conditions of your study permit. So just keep that in mind. Okay, I think I will pause here and we will build an application. So let's go sign in. So you can see here that we have 2 options to sign into an IRCC account. You have option 1, which is the GC key, and then you have option 2, which is using a sign-in partner. So it basically would connect with your online banking. Both are perfectly acceptable. It's really a matter of personal preference at that point. So we're going to go with the GC key today. And if you don't have a GC key, you are able to create one, and we do have a tutorial available on our YouTube channel if you need help basically creating one. I'm just going to log into our dummy account here. Okay, so once you log in, you have to accept the terms and conditions. You will need to answer a security question that you would have created when you created your GC key. Okay, so I'm going to delete this because this is from last time. So this is what your account should look like. If you've already used this account to submit other applications in the past, those will appear here under the applications you submitted section. And then this is where an application that you maybe started but didn't submit, it will appear down here. And just as a FYI, this is a fictitious student, so I'm not sharing personal info. We just made up the student name. So Isabella. Okay, so from here, where you want to go is you actually want to click on apply to come to Canada. And I know it's not very obvious because you're already here. You just want to apply for a work permit, but this is where you have to click. So then once you click there, you can ignore this personal reference code because this is really if you've already kind of filled out the questionnaire before. We're filling out the questionnaire for the first time, so you can just ignore that. And then you have 3 options here, and we want to apply for the postgrad work permit, so we're going to click on the first one. So what would you like to do in Canada? So we want to work. How long are you planning to stay? We're going to say temporarily, but more than 6 months. Select the code that matches the one on your passport. So we're going to do Brazil. Obviously, answer based on your situation. Current country or territory of residence. So this is important, depending on where you're planning to apply for your postgrad work permit. So it is possible to apply both inside or outside Canada, and both options are completely valid. I would say that if you don't meet the eligibility criteria like exactly, I would maybe not recommend applying outside Canada. I think officers inside Canada are a little bit more used to seeing maybe explanations and supporting documents and that kind of thing. I worry that submitting outside Canada, the officer might be a little bit more strict and just automatically refuse you because let's say you studied part-time. So just keep that in mind. But if you always were full-time, then applying outside Canada is totally fine. So we're currently in Canada. So we're going to go Canada. Do you have a family member who's a Canadian citizen or permanent resident? So answer based on your situation here. We're going to put no, and then select your birth date. What did I put as my birthday? I'm pretty sure I did this. You a lawful permanent resident of the US, so answer based on your situation. What is your current immigration status in Canada? So if your study permit is still valid, you would be clicking on student. Do you plan to work on campus? So this questionnaire is really built to kind of lead you to certain application forms. So in this case, even if you might be using your postgrad work permit to potentially work for the university, you should still answer no for the purposes of this questionnaire. So we're going to click on no. And then are you a full-time student and you want to work 20 hours a week off campus? We're going to put no because that's not what we want. We want to work full-time and we're going to be done studying. Have you recently graduated and you were full-time in at least 8 months? Yes. Is work an essential part of your studies? Here we're going to put no because again, we don't want a co-op work permit application. We want the postgrad work permit application. So clicking no will help us get to the right forms. Have you been told by an IRCC office that you've been approved in principle for PR? Again, answer based on your situation. Have you submitted a PR application? I just wanted to highlight here. So in general, you do need to be invited to submit an application for permanent residence in Canada. Filling out an express entry profile is not the same as submitting an actual application. So again, if you've filled out a profile, so you've expressed interest in applying for PR, you can still select no here because it is not the same as actually having an application submitted. So you should only answer this if you actually have an application in process right now. Otherwise, the answer should be no. Do you have a written job offer? Here again, A job offer, first of all, is not required for the postgrad work permit application. And then the type of job offer they're referring to here is a very specific one, and it's tied to a specific work permit. So for the purposes of this questionnaire, we're going to put no, even if you might have a job offer. I would still encourage you to put no in this questionnaire. Do you have an official letter from your school that confirms you've completed your study program, as well as a copy of your final transcript? You have to put yes. Those are the two documents you need to apply for postgrad work permit. What is your marital status? So answer based on your situation. What is your province of destination? So here I would recommend putting Ontario because that's where the University of Ottawa is located. But as I mentioned earlier, the postgrad work permit is an open work permit, so it will allow you to work for any employer in any province. So even if you end up working in Quebec, it's not going to make a difference if you click on Ontario here. So that's okay. Okay, so let's go next. Okay, so you can see here we have two results, either temporary resident visa or postgrad work permit in Canada. One thing I'll mention about the temporary resident visa, when you're submitting an application from inside Canada, it is unfortunately not possible to request a visa at the same time. So you may remember when you first applied for your study permit outside Canada before you came, you applied for the study permit and then you were issued a visa automatically. You didn't have to pay for it separately. They just asked for your passport, they gave you the visa, and then they gave you the letter that you then presented to the officer when you traveled to Canada to receive your study permit. That is for outside Canada. Inside Canada, unfortunately, not the same process. It is two separate processes. And so you need to first get your new permit, and then you can apply for a new visa. And it is a separate application, and it's even processed by a separate office. So postgrad work permit applications, for the most part, are processed in Edmonton. And then the visa applications are actually processed here in Ottawa. So I just wanted to mention it because it can sometimes cause confusion. So we're going to click on postgrad work permit. We're almost there, so we continue. So then it asks you again, do you have an official letter that confirms you've completed your program and a copy of your final transcript? Yes. Have you had a medical exam performed by an IRCC authorized panel physician within the last 12 months? So here you should answer again based on your situation. In general, you should only be required to undergo a medical exam if you've lived in a designated country or territory for more than 6 months in the past year. And if you Google IRCC list of designated countries, you'll get the list. And so you'll be able to determine if that applies to you. That is one reason that you need to do a medical exam. The second reason you might need to do a medical exam is if you want to work in a particular field that brings you in close contact with a vulnerable population. Example, you want to work in a school or in a hospital, that kind of thing, maybe an elderly folks home. That again, you would need a medical exam for that. If you do want to work in one of those fields, or let's say you did live in a designated country or territory for more than 6 months in the past year, you have two options for the medical exam. You could either do what's called a upfront medical exam, which would mean doing the exam before you submit your postgrad work permit application. And if you do that, you'd be answering yes to this question so that you can then upload the results, or not the results, sorry, but the confirmation that you had the appointment in your document checklist. Or you could still put no. And then what happens is IRCC will then send you a request to do a medical exam when it's time. So both are valid. Doing an upfront medical exam can help speed along the processing because then IRCC doesn't have to wait for you to, get an appointment and undergo all that. So it can be faster if you do an upfront one, but again, it's a personal choice. So we're going to put no here. And then see here, it's asking you if you've lived in a designated country or territory. So again, answer based on your situation. If you've been in Canada and you haven't left for the past year, you're good because Canada is not a designated country or territory. So we're going to put no. Do you want to work in one of the following jobs? So these are the jobs that I was talking about just a minute ago. So any of these kind of jobs, you would need to answer yes if you want to work in one of those professions, and then that would trigger you to get a medical exam. So we're going to put no. Do you want to submit an application for a family member? So if you have a spouse or common law partner or children, you could submit an application on their behalf at the same time that you submit your own. You can't submit an application, unfortunately, for like your mother or your father. It really is just immediate family, which would be dependents. So spouse, common law partner, children. So we're going to put no. Are you giving someone access to your application? For the most part, you should be answering no unless you plan to use a representative. University of Ottawa cannot be your representative, just as an FYI. In the past 10 years, have you given your fingerprint and photo biometrics for an application to come to Canada? So again, here, answer based on your situation. If you put no, then you will likely be charged the $85 fee and you will need to pay it. And then, like I said, you should be reimbursed when your application has been finalized, because the exemption is still in place. There are fees associated with this application. Will you be paying your fees, or are you fee exempt? There are some people who are fee exempt, but for the most part, you will be required to pay your fees. Are you able to make a digital copy of your documents with a camera or scanner? Very, very important for an online application. You absolutely need to have access to one of those two things to be able to apply. And then here they specify the payment methods accepted for this. So you do need to pay using one of these things. So we're going to put yes. Okay, now you're given the opportunity to review your answers. And I would recommend that you actually review them and not just scroll to the bottom and go to the next page, because it's very easy to accidentally select the wrong thing. And you can see here next to each section, there's a little pencil. So if you notice like, oh, I meant to put no, but I put yes, you can just click on that and it'll allow you to change your answer. So similarly, let's say you have a change of heart and you decide, you know what, I am going to do a medical exam before I apply. Well, then you can change your answer here to yes, so that then the section appears in your document checklist to upload the medical exam. So we're going to continue. Okay, so then on this page, you get some helpful guidelines to keep in mind when you're uploading your documents. So, you know, for example, it tells you can't use another person's account. So this should be your account. Obviously, for family, if you're applying for a spouse, common law partner, or child, that's okay. You can use you can apply for them because they're your family, but you can't apply for a friend using your account. And then now that you've built your application, you have 60 days to submit it. So it will stay in your account for 60 days. If you don't submit it at the end of the 60 days, it'll just be automatically deleted and you'll have to restart. So just keep that in mind. You know, I know some students like to prepare themselves in advance so that they're really ready to apply for their postgrad work permit like the minute they get their completion letter, to try to not lose any work authorization. And that's fine as long as it's no more than 60 days in advance. And then in this section here, they're kind of telling you what file formats are acceptable, and the maximum file size. So this is important. You can only have 4 megabytes per item. So keep that in mind, because sometimes you have to merge several documents together and that can make the file size quite big. So sometimes you need to kind of get creative to reduce the file size. And it gives you some tips here also to reduce the file size. Okay, so let's continue. So this is your document checklist. So you can see you have a series of things that you need to upload. Then there's some optional documents that you can upload, and then you have the fees here. And then once all of the mandatory documents have been uploaded, a submit or pay your fee button will appear here. I do want to clarify it, $255 is the correct price for a postgrad work permit application. I'm not sure why they break it down like this, but it is $255. So, and also if you answered no to the biometrics question, you will also have the $85 biometrics fee appear here. So your fee would be even higher if you didn't give biometrics in the past. Okay, so so let's go over the form first. So when you want to open an immigration form, they are secured PDFs. So what that means is they will not open in your browser. So if you just click on it from here, it will by default try to open in your browser. It'll look like this and it will just stay like that. It will not open because it will not open in a browser because it's a secure PDF. So you do need to download the form to your computer, save it on your computer, and then open it from your computer and not from your browser. So to download it, you have two options. So either from this screen, you can just download right here, or if you go back to your document checklist, you could right click and save link as. So those are the two options to kind of download it. I've already downloaded it, so I'm going to go ahead and open it, and then we can go over the form together. If my computer cooperates, perfect. Okay, so this is the application form. If you've had to extend your study permit in the past, this will certainly look familiar to you. It's quite similar. So UCI, not a mandatory field, but we definitely recommend putting your UCI just to avoid any confusion. If you're not sure what your UCI is, you can find it on your study permit. You specify what language you want service in. Here, we're going to be applying for a work permit for the first time or with a new employer, so that is the box we check. And then personal details, that's pretty straightforward. Here, current country or territory of residence. So again, if you're applying from inside Canada, that's where you'll indicate it here. And then the status will be student, obviously if you're here on a study permit. And then the from and to, if you put your cursor over the box, a little yellow box will show up and it'll kind of give you a hint of what they're looking for here. So it says the start date of your immigration status and your current country of residence. So that would be the issue date of your current study permit and the end date of your current study permit. So the issue date and the expiry date of your study permit are what you should be putting here in the from and to. And then here is where you would indicate if you lived in another country or territory other than your country or territory of citizenship. So if you lived somewhere else that isn't Canada or isn't your country of citizenship, this is where you would indicate it here. And then marital status, that's pretty straightforward as well. Same here, pretty straightforward. Languages, again, I don't think any of this is causing any questions. Passport, pretty self-explanatory. National identity document, we do get some questions about this. So not every country has a national identity document. So it's very possible that you don't have this and you're just like, I don't know what this is. It's not your social security number. It's not a driver's license. It's not like a health card. It's really a very unique kind of piece of ID that some countries give to all their citizens. So if you don't have one, no problem, just don't put it. If you do have one, then you can see here, only two fields are mandatory, the document number and the country or territory of issue. None of the other fields are mandatory because, to be quite honest, what information is available can really vary from one country to another. So some countries do put an issue date, but no expiry date. Some don't have an issue date, but they do have an expiry date. So anyway, long story short, put whatever information you have available on your identity document if you have one. So we're going to put no. US PR card, that's also pretty straightforward. If you have one, put it in here. Contact information. So this is very important because, this is really important because when you are applying for a document, a permit from inside Canada, the permit will be mailed to you to the address that you put on this form. So very super important to make sure that the address is correctly written here, triple check it. And also very important, if you move and you're no longer at the address on this form, while your permit is still being processed, please, please, please remember to update your address with IRCC, because we don't want your permit to be mailed to the wrong place. So definitely keep an eye on that. If you do move after you've applied, you'll be using the IRCC web form to send them your updated address, and I will share that link at the end. So address and then phone number, and then the email address is not a mandatory field, but again, please put one. That way, if IRCC does need more info about your application, they'll send you, you'll receive an email notification telling you that you have a message in your IRCC account. And you can check what the message is. It'll just facilitate communication between IRCC and you, the applicant. Okay, so coming into Canada, this is again, I think, fairly straightforward. So you want to put the date and place of your original entry to Canada, and then also the date and place of the most recent entry. And then here, for details of intended work, what type of work permit are you applying for? So we are going to be applying for the postgrad work permit. And you can see, as soon as you select that, none of this info is mandatory. So all of this, you can just leave blank, ignore it. Postgrad work permit is an open work permit. So you don't need to have an employer, an address, none of that. So you can just ignore all this. So less work. Okay, so for education, if you're applying for a postgrad work permit, that means that you've just completed or you are about to complete your post-secondary education, which is likely your highest level. So that is the info that you should be putting in here. So for Isabella, that would be her bachelor's degree that she is finishing in May at the University of Ottawa. For employment, this is where you would give the history of your employment for the past 10 years, whether that's part-time jobs, full-time jobs, inside Canada, outside Canada, really any jobs that you've had for the past 10 years should be listed here. And if you run out of room, because there's only 3 fields, then I would encourage you to elaborate or expand on this in the client information section, which if you'll remember is down here. So the client information is basically your opportunity to provide more information about your application that you've not already provided. So that's where I would expand on the other jobs that don't fit here. Okay, so that's for employment. And then we get to the background section. So basically you just need to answer these questions truthfully. And then if you answer yes to any of them, you do need to kind of give an explanation. Most of them are pretty straightforward. Here, this question, very important. So if you did remain, if you applied for your, if you let your study permit expire and then you had to restore your status, that counts as remaining beyond the validity of your status. And if you accidentally kept working when you weren't actually authorized to, that counts as well. You have to declare it here. Have you ever been refused a visa or permit or denied entry or ordered to leave Canada or any other country? That's super important. Most students think that's just about Canada, but it says any other country. So if you were, for example, denied a US visa, you have to declare that here as well. So very important to answer truthfully these questions, because anything you answer incorrectly and it turns out that it was, in fact, it should have been a yes and you put no, that can be considered misrepresentation, and that can lead to a whole bunch of issues and even inadmissibility to Canada. So very, very important to make sure that you are reading these thoroughly and answering them thoroughly. Have you previously applied to enter or remain in Canada? That should be yes for all of you, because if you're here on a study permit, that means that you applied for one, at some point. So that would mean, so you can see here, that's what Isabella has put. She applied in 2018, and then she's been a student ever since. So apologies if you can hear the sirens outside my office. Okay, have you ever been arrested? Did you ever serve in the military? And yeah, these ones are all pretty straightforward. Okay, so then we get to the signature section. So this, you consent to be contacted by IRCC about the client service, that you can decide. I usually put yes, but you aren't obligated to. And then in terms of signing this form, because you're submitting this electronically, you don't actually have to physically sign it. So you would be typing your name as it appears on your official document, your travel document. So just type your name, and then you want to put today's date. And then once you think you've filled out everything correctly, you want to hit the validate button. And then if you did fill out everything correctly, you should see a message like this show up saying that it was successful. And then it even tells you here, if you're applying online, you do not need to sign your form by hand. You're going to be asked to provide an electronic signature once you're actually submitting your application. So we click OK, and then we see that these barcodes are added to our document, and that's great. That's what we want. So then make sure we save this. And then we go back to our document checklist, and we're going to upload it. So we're going to go to upload. We're going to choose the file. And then we're going to go to where we saved it on our computer. So for me, it's here. We're going to upload. Sometimes it takes a minute. It's thinking about it. I love when this happens during an info session. Aha. So the website will tell you if you've made a mistake. And in this case, I put a different birthday on the form than the one I put in the questionnaire, which is my fault. So I will open the form again. But this is good because it stops you from making mistakes. So I think I put 2002, which is why. So I save it again. And let's upload it again. Now it worked. So this is what happens if you do it, right. So then you go back to our documents, and then you can see here, instead of it saying not provided, you actually see it in green, and it says that it gives you the file name. So that's good. That's one thing done. So now I'll just quickly go over the rest of the checklist, and then I will take your questions. So recent education transcript. That is obviously your transcript, unofficial or official, as I mentioned, but as long as it's final. And you can see here next to every element in the checklist, it gives you instructions, if you click on the little question mark. So it kind of gives you instructions on what to include here. So that's for that. Family information form, not all of you will have this in your checklist. It's only asked for certain citizens of certain countries. So if this doesn't appear in your document checklist, no worries. That means you don't have to provide it. If it does appear in your checklist, then you do need to fill it out and provide it. It should be a form you've seen before. It should be basically just asking you for stuff about your family, and then you have to sign it. That one does need to be signed by hand. And then if you don't have a spouse or common law partner and you have no children, you're actually signing the form in 3 different places, not just once. So just keep that in mind. Completion of studies letter, so that we went over, that has to be the official letter confirming that you've successfully completed your program. And I'm actually going to show you what it looks like quickly. So if you are an undergrad student, this is like a rough, it will look a lot nicer than this, I promise. This is just like the template. And I think this is for the Faculty of Science, but it'll basically be, it'll be on letterhead and it'll be signed, and it'll basically confirm that you've completed the requirements for your program, however many units it is, when you're going to be eligible to get your degree, and that's it. So that's for undergrad. That's what it looks like. And like as I mentioned, that you'll be requesting from your faculty directly. They will not send it to you automatically, so remember to request it. And then if you're a grad student, this is what your document will look like. So again, at the grad level, yes, the faculty will be the one responsible for evaluating your file and making sure that you do, you know, you did successfully meet the requirements, but it's InfoService that's going to be issuing the letter for you. So this is what it looks like. And again, this is the rough one, so it will look way nicer. There'll be a seal on there, a signature, it'll be on letterhead, all that. And it'll, you know, certify what program you completed. It'll give the duration of the program, like I mentioned earlier. And then, yeah, so that's what that looks like. So that you can request from InfoService. Statement of degree requirements completed. So that is for the completion of studies letter. For passport, if we click on that quickly, so you should include the biographical data page of your passport. And then any page that has like a visa or a stamp or marking should also be included. So that's for passport. Digital photo, that also, it gives you the instructions here. So a couple different options. So you could either get a photo taken at anywhere that does like passport photos basically, and then scan it, or you can take a photo yourself as long as you're respecting the dimensions here. So just keep that in mind. Optional documents. So this Schedule 1, you can just ignore that document because as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, it's not possible to ask for the visa at the same time. So even if you were to fill this out, they would not do anything with it. You will need to submit a separate application and pay a separate processing fee to apply for a visa from inside Canada. Client information. Again, this is optional depending on if there's anything you need to explain or anything that you want to highlight in your application. So if it's a very straightforward application, you might not need one. We kind of like to advise that you include one, even if it's just like almost like a cover letter at that point where you're just explaining like, yep, I just finished this program, was always full-time, looking to apply for a 3-year work permit. That's basically it. But this, if you're someone who doesn't meet the eligibility criteria, this is where this client information section is very important because this is where you're going to be able to provide the context for and explain what maybe happened during your studies. So would definitely recommend that you reach out for an individual advising appointment if you're not sure if you should be explaining something or highlighting something in your application. Okay, so that is the whole document checklist. We are 12:48, doing pretty good for time. I do want to take the questions as well. So what I'll do is I'll just go quickly back to the PowerPoint just to talk about the SIN number. I'm just going to do it quickly, these slides, and then I will take the questions. So once you have received a decision on your work permit and your postgrad work permit was approved, you need to remember to update your SIN record. So your SIN, oops, too fast. Your SIN record should always match your status document. So every time your status document changes, you should be updating your SIN record. The SIN number itself will not change. It only changes when you become a PR, but you do need to update the expiry date basically. As of today, Service Canada in-person appointments or services are by appointment only, but you can update your SIN record online or by mail, and we give you the link here, how to do that. For the University Health Insurance Plan, or UHIP, so as full-time students, eligible for health insurance, obviously you've had it the whole time you're here. Yeah, that coverage ends at convocation. So, and to be eligible for provincial health coverage, so let's say for Ontario, you need to have a permanent job or position that is longer than 6 months before you're eligible for OHIP. So you might need to get, alternate health coverage to kind of cover the gap between when you're done, like after convocation, to when you are able to find a job. So there may be alternate coverage available with the alumni office. So we give you the link here. So if you are interested in purchasing or inquiring about that health coverage, I would recommend that you reach out to them directly. So we give you their link here. And then right now, the alternate coverage is offered with Manulife. So we also give you their email addresses, but I would recommend reaching out to the alumni office first to ask about that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention before I just talk about how to reach us for questions and help is the spouse open work permit for spouses or common law partners. So students, the spouses of students or common law partners of students were eligible for work permits while they were a full-time student. Once that student is no longer a student and is in fact a work permit holder, the eligibility changes, but they are still eligible under this exemption here. But the postgrad work permit holder does need to be in a skilled job and has to have been in a skilled job for a couple weeks. They need to include pay stubs. So just keep in mind that it's not automatic. So you might not be able to extend your spouse or common law partner's open work permit at the same time that you apply for your postgrad work permit. There will be like a gap, a transition there, because the eligibility changes for the spouse. Okay. So how to reach us? The quickest way to get a hold of us is normally attending our drop-in sessions that we have on a weekly basis called SOS Immigration. No appointment needed. You just show up to the Zoom, ask your question, and then you can leave when you're satisfied and when you've had your answer. So we offer those every week. They alternate between Thursdays and Mondays. The schedule is on our website, and we're giving you the link here. Right now, the schedule goes until the end of April, but we will be announcing a spring-summer schedule as well. Another way you can get a hold of us is by requesting a virtual advising appointment. This is what I would definitely recommend if you want to have your application reviewed or you need help with a certain part of your application. Definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can send us an email. So our email address is uointl@uottawa.ca. And then I also wanted to mention that, so our advising services, we're able to offer them for up to 6 months after you complete your program. So basically the same eligibility period to apply for the postgrad work permit. So that's where kind of our advising services end. So just keep that in mind when you're reaching out to us. And then other ways to get information, we have our immigration FAQs that we update fairly regularly. So make sure to check those out. On our website, again, we also have the schedule for the other information sessions. Right now, it's just what's available for the winter term, but we will be announcing a summer one, so stay tuned for that. And then we also have our immigration YouTube playlist here of all the recordings from the other sessions that we've done so far. And that is the end of the PowerPoint. So let me go back to the chat and I will start taking questions for the rest of the time. Spring, summer is my last semester of graduation from MBA professional program. Just have 7.5 credit. Can I work full-time during summer? My status is study permit. So no, so to be able to work full-time during the summer, it has to be considered a regularly scheduled break. And then in order to work full-time during a regularly scheduled break, you have to be a full-time student before the break and after the break. So in your case, if that is your last term, then it's not considered a regularly scheduled break at that point. It's just considered a regular study term. So you would be limited to your regular study work authorizations, which is 20 hours off campus, no limit on campus. Hi, Alexandra, could you please share the UOttawa link to where the duration of the graduate programs are mentioned? Yes, let me, whoops. Sorry, I'm just gonna go to that PowerPoint slide and get the link. I think it's, oh, here. Okay, so I'm gonna put this in here in the chat. Just as a reminder, I will be, so this session is obviously being recorded. So we're going to upload the recording and then also include the presentation slides when we upload that to our YouTube channel. So the PowerPoint will be available for download directly from the description of the YouTube video. So you will have access to both once we upload that. If you say have an uncle or aunt who is a permanent resident or citizen of Canada, do you still click no? Yes, so the question is specifically about a sibling from what I remember for the questionnaire. So you should put no if it's an aunt. Oh yeah, I get timed out now, so, but yes, from what I remember. For working part-time off campus during my study, I had to apply? No. That is a very old, so there used to be an off-campus work permit and they just haven't modified the questionnaire. So the questionnaire, that question's still there, but no, it would have said on your study permit, if you were allowed to work off campus, you wouldn't have had to ask for it specifically. I did medical exam outside Canada last 10 months. Which option can I select when asking medical exam within last 12, yes or no? So if it was 10 months ago, that's still within 12 months. So you would put yes, and you would need to upload proof of that medical exam. Not the actual results, because we never receive those. Those are transmitted directly to IRCC, but the confirmation of the appointment you had should be uploaded. But medical exam results remain valid for 12 months from the date that you had it. So as long as you're within that, then you should be putting yes, and you should be uploading those medical exam results. Okay, I have a question. I have a work permit valid until January 2023 because I worked in co-op. Do I have the authorization to work until then? This because I have a job offer until December 2022 and my studies finish August 2022. So no, so unfortunately, so that co-op work permit is just for work that is a mandatory component of your program. So if the job you're working or for this job offer is not a mandatory part of your program and you're no longer going to be tied to your student status, then that work permit that you no longer have that authorization to work. So if your studies are going to end in August, you would only have that part-time work authorization if you're a full-time student in your final term, or if it's your last one, if you're always full-time and that's your last term, if you're part-time. And then you'd be able to work part-time until you get that written confirmation, which would probably be, I'm guessing, towards the mid to end September. And then as of the date that you get the written confirmation, you'd have to stop working until you apply for the post-grad work permit at that point. Thanks, Alexandra. Can I extend the open work permit of spouse in the same post-grad work permit with me if the job of mine is 15 hours a week? How many hours minimum? That's a great question. My understanding is that there is no minimum for the number of hours. So you should be able to, if you're already in that job, then you should be able to extend at the same time and you already have pay stubs. My understanding is that that shouldn't be an issue. As far as I know, there isn't, it's not limited to the, you just have to be a skilled worker. It doesn't say you have to be a full-time skilled worker. As a master's student, will not taking classes in the summer affect our postgrad work permit, or is summer considered a scheduled break? Jocelyn, it depends on your master's program. So there are certain master's programs where it is the spring summer term is considered a regularly scheduled break. And if that's the case, it's usually indicated in the official program description for your program. So the link I sent in the chat earlier, it should be mentioned there if it is a scheduled break. So I would recommend that you check that to confirm if it is or not. Does that mean that we are not allowed to work full-time if this is our last school semester? Yeah, so I'm not sure what term semester you're referring to, but if this winter is your last term, then the spring summer is not a break for you because you're not returning to studies in the fall term, you're completing your program. So you would need to ask for a work permit to be able to work beyond you being done your program. If you're studying in the spring summer and that's your last term, same thing, then it's not considered a break unless you're returning to full-time studies in the fall. The spring summer term is not considered a regularly scheduled break for you, basically, is the short answer. Okay, answered that. I'm a US citizen, but I do not live in the US. I was wondering, in regards to the US permanent residence section on the form, would I select no or yes? I would still put no. So you're a temporary resident somewhere else, but you are still a US citizen, so not a permanent resident. So, and yes, the national identity document is not your passport. It's a different document. Do we have to pay for OHIP? Yeah, that's a good question. Technically, kind of like through your taxes, but no, you're not like kind of like sent a bill for OHIP. But it's based on your employment and then your contributions through that employment. So there's like a number of deductions kind of when you're an employee, and some of those deductions go towards social and health benefits, basically. I'm not an expert on OHIP or UHIP, so for any other questions, I would recommend that you send us an email about that. My study permit will expire 90 days after completion, but the PGWP takes 133 days. What happens to my status in between? Yes, that is a great question. So as long as you apply for the work permit before your study permit becomes invalid, you will benefit from what's called maintained status. You will be allowed to continue to remain in Canada and work until a decision is made on your application, even if it goes beyond the validity of your current permit. And so when you get, so I mentioned earlier, when you apply for the postgrad work permit, you get 2 letters from IRCC. You get one that confirms that your application was received. And then you get one that confirms your authorization to work. On that authorization to work letter, usually they do give you like an end date, and it normally corresponds to like the normal processing time for that kind of application. So if ever we're getting close to the date, the end date that's indicated on that letter, you are able to use the IRCC web form, which reminds me that I need to give you the link for that. You can use the IRCC web form to request a new letter. a new end date, a new letter, or they might just finalize your work application, your work permit application at that time. So don't worry if the processing takes really long. You will still be allowed to work as long as you applied within the validity of your study permit. I'm just going to pull up the web form and put the link in there. Here we go. Okay, I'm just going to put this in the chat. This is the new web form. Okay, I'm just continuing here. The executive MBA is not mentioned in the catalog of programs. However, the description is on Telfer. Yes, sorry, Telfer does kind of put their stuff on their own website. Can take place over 21 months of schedule, or with 17 months of in-session class. So will IRCC consider it as a 21-month program for the purpose of PGWP? Yeah, I would say so. If that's what the description says on the website, then that is likely what IRC or what info service will put on your program completion letter. And then the officer would look at that and would look at your transcript to show the actual time spent studying, and then make a decision based on that. Okay, I see some more questions here. I will be writing my last paper April ending. When can I apply for postgrad work permit? So it depends when your final grades are available for the winter term. May 17th is the last date that official grades should be posted, and then May 27th is when your academic standing should be posted. So I would say mid to late May is when you should be able to receive your completion documents and apply for the postgrad work permit. Yes, you can apply with an unofficial transcript, but it does need to be final. So all of your grades need to be on there. And then you request, if you're a grad student, you should request your completion letter from info service. You'll be able to listen to the recording of this video to get more info on that, but it will be info service. So your faculty will still be responsible for evaluating that you've met the requirements of your program, but you will request the letter from info service. And it will need to be a formal request with them. And yes, you can apply for your daughter's TRV at the same time that you apply for your postgrad work permit. My SIN number will expire in July. I can work full time. Do I need to update the SIN? Yeah, so I kind of went over that. You can only update your SIN record once your application for the work permit has been approved. So you can't do anything with your SIN in the meantime, but you can continue to get paid using your SIN even if it's expired. When is the term considered completed? The day we get the letter or the end of the month? So for this term, when do we know is going to be my last day of the term, considering this is my last term and I'm currently working full-time co-op? So I would go with the official term dates on the on this calendar here. So April 30th is the last day of the term, but your part-time, so that is when your co-op work term would end. And then I would say you can start working as soon as you apply for the postgrad work permit in May. So it's not the date, like let's say you had exams, it's not the date you finish your final exam, it would be April 30th, the official end date, the last date of the term. During the period where we wait for the postgrad work permit, are we allowed to renew our temporary visas? Unfortunately, no. So the temporary resident visa always has to match, or it basically is issued like in accordance with your status document. So if you don't have a status document, you can't like renew your visa. So if that's the case, if you're really thinking that you need to travel kind of relatively soon, then you might want to consider applying for the postgrad work permit from outside Canada, because then that way the visa will be included in the application, and then you can just visit outside Canada while you wait for the work permit to be processed. That would be a possibility. Otherwise, unfortunately, if you're applying from within Canada, you're kind of stuck waiting out the processing times, and then waiting out the processing times for the visa as well. My study permit finishes in January 2023. I'm not allowed to work part-time until the study permit finishes. No, so as I mentioned, your study permit will become invalid 90 days after you complete your program. So, so you're able to work part-time until you receive that written confirmation of program completion. And then as soon as you get that written confirmation of program completion, you have to stop working until you apply. If you're still unsure, I would definitely recommend that you reach out to us to book an individual advising appointment so we can go over your situation in more detail, just because I know we're already 10 minutes over time. So I'm just going to keep going. How long does it take to issue the letter of completion? That really depends, unfortunately. It can be based on the volume of requests they're dealing with. So I would just recommend that you request it as early as possible to allow either the faculty if you're undergrad or info service if you're grad, the maximum amount of time to kind of process the request, because it's hard to say. I can't answer that because it kind of depends on the volume. Can you elaborate on the waiting period for a spouse while the student applies for postgrad work permit? Can we file both the applications together? You can only file the applications together if you're already in a skilled job. So basically, when you're no longer a student and you become a worker, the eligibility for a work permit for the spouse changes. It's no longer automatic. You have to be a skilled worker in order for your spouse to be eligible for an open work permit. So if you are not a skilled worker and you're just job searching, then your spouse is not eligible to extend their open work permit at that time. So they would need to temporarily change their status to, let's say, visitor, and then apply for a new work permit once you yourself are in a skilled job. Okay, I think I've answered everything in the chat. And I definitely feel like I've talked a lot of words. So I think we will end the session here. Thank you so much for all of the questions and your participation. Again, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have more questions, or if you need an individual advising appointment, especially if you think your case is a little bit complex, you're not sure, you know, because your last term isn't this winter, and then maybe it's the last term is a co-op term. It can be a little bit confusing. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out to book an appointment. We will not be offering another session on the postgrad work permit specifically, but we continue to offer our drop-in sessions, SOS Immigration, on a weekly basis. So there is one tomorrow at 10 a.m. So I would encourage you to attend if you still have questions as well. And it doesn't, it isn't a complex question. You don't think you need an individual appointment, definitely just drop in tomorrow at 10 and happy to answer your questions then. And yeah, in the meantime, oh yes, so for the YouTube, we will be asking our comms team to do that probably tomorrow. And then they're usually pretty quick. So I would say by next week for sure, it should be available. If you're not sure, definitely just send us an email. We're happy to let you know that it's there. Right now, the one that's there on our YouTube channel is the one from last term, which is very similar. So it can probably still help you out, but we will be replacing it with this one as soon as we can. So yeah, again, if you're not sure, definitely don't hesitate to get in touch with us or attend a drop-in, and we can let you know that it's been uploaded. Yeah, thank you so much. Take care, stay safe. And yeah, hope to see you again soon. Bye, everyone.